Hi, my preferred sobriquet is James, and Spies Are Forever is a musical. So a few years ago, I was watching Spies Are Forever, and I noticed that Agent Kurt Mega was putting his finger along the barrel of the gun at some points. As someone with a passing interest in guns, I realized he was practicing trigger discipline. So obviously my next move is to analyze every single frame of the musical and figure out which characters are practicing proper gun safeties and which are not. Of course, that was a few years ago. Things happened. I had to watch Arcane. I had to play some Minecraft. But that all changes now. I had pulled up the musical, I've started watching it, and I've got plenty of time to do it. So please join me as I regale to you the story of gun safety in Spies Are Forever. Wait, I actually have three major disclaimers to make. Mainly number one, which is spoilers. I know it came out 9 years ago, but you still like to be warned about spoilers. Number two, I am imperfect, and I kind of did this to the best of my ability, but I have, I'm going to say, not perfect skills in gun safety and or attention to detail. So I might have missed a few instances, or there's some things that you would disagree on whether or not that's proper gun handling etiquette. So if you have some complaints, please don't tell me. And disclaimer the third, I'm doing this entirely for fun, and it's not meant to be a critique of the musical or of any of the actors. It's just a fun little thing to figure out some of the minute details that some people didn't consider. And you can tell great stories if you add in the minute details, but you don't need to get bogged down in that to tell a good story. And one more thing before we get started, actually. It's going to be the rules. I don't want to do this all willy-nilly. I want to have some kind of framework for how I'm going to judge whether or not they're being safe. So I have some decisions in place for it to make sense. Now I'm going to grab some rules from Wikipedia, because that's the first place I think of when I think of good information, because some things are getting worse now, but what are you going to do about that? I still have Wikipedia. Here's the Wikipedia page for gun safety. We're going to find that there's this section called training right here. Now, make it bigger. Here. And that is what we're going to be considering. You'll see three main things right here, but they're kind of bland, unexplained. Trigger discipline, muzzle discipline, separation of firearm and ammunition when firearm is not directly in use. Okay, that one actually is explained pretty well. But the other two need a bit more pizzazz for it to make sense. So, firstly, trigger discipline. Discipline related to the trigger. Mainly this boils down to don't put your finger on the trigger unless you are ready to shoot something. Secondly is muzzle discipline, which is don't point your gun at anything you're not willing to destroy or kill. So in Spies Are Forever, it's going to be enemies or the ground or the sky that they're not willing to shoot. Probably not their allies, though. They really don't want to shoot their friends. Probably. And as for the third one of separation of ammo and firearm when firearm is not actually in use, that's pretty well explained and also pretty clear on the rules. If the firearm is being used by someone or about to be used, so a spy in the field, then I don't really care about the ammunition because they should be loaded. But if they're, say, I don't know, cleaning a gun, for example, then the firearm should not have any ammo in it. But that probably won't come up. With those being our guidelines, I'm going to apply them to the characters in the following fashion. 1. Every time that a character puts their finger on the trigger and they're not expressly intending to shoot something, that's a discipline infraction. Secondly, I'll give a muzzle infraction every time a character aims somewhere besides the sky, the ground, and someone they want to shoot. The ammunition one is pretty clear, so we don't really need to worry about that one. And all final decisions come down to me because no one else is helping me with this. So if you don't like my decision, then please tell me and I will do nothing about it because I don't want to re-edit this video. Now on to the infractions. Owen pulls what is actually the second gun from his pants and immediately puts his finger on the trigger. That's not a great start, but even worse is the fact that he then points it at Kurt's legs. After being handed the gun by Owen, Kurt immediately racks it and then puts his finger on the trigger. Owen pulls his first gun out of his pocket and immediately puts his finger on the trigger. He then switches to his other hand and puts his finger on the trigger again. What's made worse is that he's waving it around, seemingly pointing at Kurt, and then into his own hand. Kurt here does a first of many instances of him flexing his finger on and off the trigger. Owen waves his gun at Kurt. Kurt aims at his own thigh. Owen switches the gun between hands to pistol whip Oleg and puts his finger on the trigger. While adjusting his shirt, Owen aims at his own head. They do a nice little trade here where they swipe their guns across each other's legs. Their nice little hand grab gun thing ends up with them pointing into each other's arms. The synchronized dance with the gun behind your back is pretty much pointing at the other guy. Owen puts the gun away whenever he's climbing the ladder, but whenever he pulls it out again and we see it, he has his finger on the trigger. Our first instance of someone not known to be a spy is this unnamed Russian guard, number 1, and he is doing a trigger infraction because he's pointing his gun up, and he's definitely not trying to shoot something. Kurt waves his gun over Owen. They both pull out their guns and put their fingers on the trigger and do the arm dance again. The synchronized dance with the gun behind your back is pretty much pointing at the other guy. Kurt has no target here and his fingers on the trigger. Kurt uses the gun like a pointer to make a point to Owen. Owen pulls his gun out and puts his finger on the trigger despite not aiming at the Russian guard. Now for this whole running scene, I'm just going to give everyone a trigger infraction and a muzzle infraction. Really, don't run with guns in your hands, kids, and especially don't do it with your finger on the trigger. This particular Russian guard actually makes another mistake that no one else does. Whenever he's swinging his gun around, he does it to the side instead of up ahead like everyone else does, so that makes it so he's doing another infraction, pointing at Russian guard number 4. I gave them a bit of a pass for whenever the bomb was going off, because the bomb was going off, but in the recovery, the Russian guards actually make a few mistakes. Number 2 points their gun at number 3, 1 points their gun at number 2, 1 is then putting their gun against number 2's thigh, 2 waves his gun to say, hey, let's go that way, but he's not looking where he's going, so that's not good either. Then the camera shifts, and number 5 points his gun at number 1 to say, hey, come with me. And he takes his finger off the trigger, so he's probably going to get a trigger discipline in the future, but, that's the future. And that's the main scramble. In the middle of that, Kurt actually points his gun at Owen and then puts it into his back as well. And there it is. He's doing his trigger infraction. There's his finger. He's got it again. And that has been Act 1, Part 1. Now we go into Act 1, Part 2. Hopefully it's faster. All right, starting off strong. That special garnish is pointed at Kurt.
Dinky.
And while you may be tempted to give Kurt a little bit of leeway after getting his
Dinky.
pointed at by a
Dinky.
idiot with a gun, I'm not going to. The entire time he's moving around himself, he's pointing it at his side. And here, Kurt puts the gun away into the folder. Unfortunately, he manages to put his finger on the trigger in less than a second. Look, I know this is choreography, but Kurt is waving his gun around a diner in canon, and I'm pretty sure, given his talk about secrecy with Susan, he doesn't want to be causing any property damage that will be noticed by these civilians. And at this... Oh, that was Part 2. There's only 4 instances. You know what? I'll take it. Alright, on to Part 3. And here we're introduced to the deadliest man alive. And he is sharpening his gun with a knife. There's a lot of things wrong with that, but another thing that's wrong is the fact he has his finger on the trigger. But he's not pointing at anyone, so I guess that's good. And here he puts his finger on the trigger while putting his gun away, which is, Now I'm so sure that right here, Anne Company has their finger on the trigger, but I can't see it, and unfortunately for me, and fortunately for Anne Company, I call it like I see it, so they're not getting an infraction. And unfortunately for them, and fortunately for me, they immediately screwed up by putting the gun away with their finger on the trigger and pointing it at themselves. Oh, Kurt's back. But unfortunately, he has his finger on the trigger, and the Russian lady above him also has her finger on the trigger. On her nice little walk, our Russian lady is waving her gun around a lot. Oh, Kurt, you can't wave your gun around like that too. That's another violation. I don't care how frustrated you are. And that was Act 1, Part 3. Now we move on to our next section. Kurt has this odd habit of putting his middle finger on the trigger, which is still an infraction. And he's also putting his finger on the trigger while he's reloading. And once again, he's waving his gun around whenever he's exasperated. And he also managed to put his finger on the trigger after taking it off. And now he's putting his finger back on the trigger now that he's singing. Then he aims into the crowd, which is not technically a crowd, but it's Cynthia's office, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't want bullet holes in the wall. Cynthia picks up her gun right here, and she immediately puts her finger on the trigger. And after shooting Kurt, she keeps her finger on the trigger. And given that he's probably not intending to shoot him twice, that's bad practice. I would counter off for aiming her gun at Kurt still, but she obviously doesn't mind killing him, so it's fine. And that's been Act 1, Part 4. And now on to Act 1, Part 5. So a few things on this section with my knowledge from the future. I only care about firearms, lasers, and acid sprayers are outside of my jurisdiction. Secondly, as a reference, a few scientists are playing with things on the shelves over here, and those are actually guns, so they will be treated as such. There's about 6 things that we have to consider. There's the cane, umbrella, candlestick, coffee cup, apple, and paperclip. Here's a diagram of those 6 and where the barrel is for each of them. I want to point out the coffee cup and the apple because they are the most interesting. Firstly, the coffee cup. We see Charlie rack it here, and typically racking a firearm is done in line with the barrel of the gun, as you are evacuating the chamber and adding more movement adds complexity, which makes it more likely to fail. Thus, the barrel is out of the rim of the mug. The apple isn't racked, but Unnamed Scientist number 4 does a reference to the James Bond intro here, which implies that the barrel is on the outside rim of the apple. I can't keep track of the orientation of the apple because it is small and uniform, so everything in a circle is going to be considered the barrel. So on to violations. So starting off with Unnamed Scientist number 2. He is using the apple, which has the barrel somewhere on the outside of it. And that means he's either pointing at himself or someone else in the room. Next we have number 4, who is seemingly pointing the coffee cup at number 2's head, but Mega kind of covers it for a second. But then you see that number 2 is leaning into it, so I'm believing that number 4 was aiming at number 2's head. And here number 4 is aiming a cane, which is also a gun, at his leg. Jeez, number 2, that coffee cup is a gun! Don't point that at your head! Now this character is actually named. Unfortunately, he's just as dumb. He's pointing another gun at his head. Once again, he points the coffee cup in his face. I also find it hard to believe that Charlie's hand is not on the trigger somewhere, but I can't tell because it's a coffee cup. So he gets away with it. Now his stance here is a reference to the famous James Bond intro, which implies that the apple is aimed at his face when he's doing this, and then towards the fourth wall, which is just another wall of the scientist's lab, both of which are pretty unsafe. I don't want to get shot. I don't think he wants to shoot me either. Hopefully. And that was part 5. Now we're on to part 6, which is my favorite one, given my outfit of choice. First, we have Owen's ghost up here with his finger on the trigger. What do you mean that's it? There's nothing else? Gambling. Fine. On to part number 7. Yeah? What do you mean? Wait, it's a bunch of Nazis doing a dance. What do you mean there's no guns? There's just no guns? They didn't give Nazis guns? Oh, I guess that'd be the smart decision. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Bye. Love you. There's nothing in part 7. They don't give the Nazis guns. All right, that was part 7. And now we're going to do part 8. We're going to do it pretty quickly because most of the things are the same thing done by the same character in about 10 seconds. So putting your finger on the trigger is not a good way to pistol whip a man. Putting your gun at someone's back is not good if you're trying to save them. Swinging your gun around isn't very safe. Pointing your gun at the person you're trying to save isn't very safe. Oops. Swinging your gun around isn't very safe. Swinging your gun around isn't very safe. And Owen, trigger discipline. Come on, man. You don't want to shoot Kurt's mind. Come on. All right, so that's all of Act 1. Let's take a break and do a little data analysis, look at what we have for everyone. We'll see that Kurt is up top with, geez, that is 11 and 15. Rough showing. That being the main character will do that to you. Owen's a close second, which is impressive for him being only in one act, or one part, I should say. Most of these records are set in stone because we're not going to see any of these characters again. Unfortunately, Unnamed Russian Guard number 2 isn't exactly important to the plot. But we will see Tatiana more, so maybe, given the fact that she has 8 muzzle infractions, she could overtake at least Owen. Maybe not Kurt, because Kurt's going to be here too. But she could overtake Owen, and that would be something. As you'll see right here, there's actually still no infractions for separation of ammunition from firearm when firearm is not directly in use. So probably that's going to stay the same. I can't really see a situation where they're going to be, I don't know, cleaning a gun, so it probably should stay the same. I don't have any knowledge from the future, so how would it change? Anyway, on to Act 2. And now we're on to Act 2, Part 1, the very beginning of Act 2. A very good place to start. We start with the deadliest man. As you can see here, he's pulling out his gun, and actually, he's racking it and then putting it away. But his finger's on the trigger, so it's a problem nonetheless. And here, when he's planning to shoot Prince Flurgan, before he's actually aiming, he puts his finger on the trigger, so that's a violation. And now we're on to what Tatiana does. Initially, she waves her gun at Mega. There's her finger on the trigger. Now she's waving her gun around a bit more. But now she's waving it even higher. There's civilians. This is a party. Oh, there's her trigger finger again. She's waving her gun around again. And now she's pointing at Mega. That's still not safe. And she's pointing at him again, which is still not safe. And that's it for Act 2, Part 1. Just Deadliest Man and Tatiana. And now we're on to Act 2, Part 2. Except for we're not actually, because there's nothing happening in it. They just don't do anything with the gun. Mrs. Mega and Tatiana do clean the gun, but I'm going to assume it's unloaded because we've never seen them able to unload them. So we're going to presume that the props are just incapable of having their magazines taken out, so this is proper treatment. Even the separation of firearms from ammunition whenever a firearm is not in use. Everything's fine. And we'll be skipping Act 2, Part 3 as well, mainly because there's no guns in it. They're just drinking alcohol, they don't use firearms, which is responsible, but that's not what I care about, so we're moving on. Act 2, Part 4 is infinitely bigger than Part 3, in the fact that 1 is infinitely bigger than 0, but you know what, whatever. Anyway, there's one instance where we can see right here that the deadliest man alive is putting his finger on the trigger before he's aiming at Bertolus. I mean Susan. She does her job very well. And that's our one instance for Act 4. So we're going to move on to Act 2, Part 5. These three are just fresh off the revelation that the deadliest man alive is Owen Carver, and most of them decided not to shoot, but it seems Tatiana's still fine, so she gets a pass on that trigger finger, but Kurt and Susan do not, given the fact they are pointing almost directly at the ground. And now we see that Tatiana has lowered her weapon. She is also getting a trigger violation for that. And now she's waving around her gun. That's a violation. And Kurt has a little bit of movie magic here, where he takes his finger off the trigger on screen, but then he puts it back on off screen. Still a violation, no matter how magical it was. And Susan, you're going to get counted off for the fact you're waving your gun around to try and make a point, because you're pointing at yourself and at Kurt, which is not good. And here we see Kurt take his finger off of the trigger and then put it back on. Another violation, another shame. All right, now we start Part 6, and that's Kurt reloading his gun. You can take the magazines out. That means in Part 2 that Mrs. Mega and Tatiana could have taken the magazine out, and they didn't. Yeah, we gotta go back to Part 2. All right, now that that guy's out of the way, we're gonna do Part 2 again. We can see that that is a loaded weapon, and Tatiana is pointing that at Mrs. Mega. That's a violation. And now she's pointing at Mrs. Mega again. Another violation. All right, now Mrs. Mega has the gun. Let's see how she treats it. Okay, I'm going to need an instant replay on that because she is doing a lot of things really fast. All right, first she points her gun at her own leg. Then she switches to her other hand, puts her finger on the trigger, and aims it at her son. Then she taps her son on the shoulder with the barrel of a gun. Then she aims it at her own thigh. Then she aims it at Tatiana. Then she aims at her own thigh and Kurt and Tatiana. Then she waves her gun back to the back of Kurt's head. She cleans the gun while it's pointed at Kurt's back. And then she aims at Tatiana and then Kurt again. And then once more, she aims at Tatiana before putting it down. Jeez, that is a lot of violations very quickly. Okay, now we're done with Act 2, Part 2. We can go back to Act 2, Part 6 and see what's going on. And coming back to Act 2, Part 6, we see that nothing happens. It's Kurt and Owen doing a chase scene. They're the only ones with guns, and they treat them properly. They only aim at each other, and they have their fingers on the trigger when they're aiming at each other. The whole thing's done perfectly legitimately, according to my rules. So, we're going to move on to Part 7. Part 7's the same. There's no violations here. There's one instance where Kurt has a gun, and he keeps his finger off the trigger the entire time. He looks where he's aiming the entire time. And I'm giving him some leeway here, mainly because he's doing a soliloquy, so he's talking to the audience, and I don't think it's real. So it's like, he's not even talking in reality anymore, so I might as well not consider it gun safe. Do you think it's gun safe to be holding a gun in your dream? I think it's safe. So, no violations in Part 7. And that means we can do a summary on what happened in Part 2. And from our summary, we can see that only 5 people actually have violations here. But that's more on the fact that we don't have any new characters. We don't have any unnamed Russian guards or unnamed scientists. Or Charlie. I miss Charlie. His hard drive would be nice right about now. But mostly, things stay pretty consistent. Tatiana is getting a number of muzzle violations, as she's wont to do. Mrs. Mega is really the standout contender. She has 13 muzzle violations in one scene. In one act, she managed to get 13 violations. I think she's matched only by her son in Part 1. Although I think he had 11 violations, not 13. It was 11. Alright, that'll wrap up the summary of Act 2. So now I can go on to the final summary of all the details together and seeing who is the most unsafe in Spies Are Forever. We're not going to do that, actually. I have you hostage right now, so I'm going to go through a couple of things that I found very interesting, and we're just going to run through them real quick, and you can say how interesting you thought they were at the end. All right. 1. In Act 1, Part 1, Owen pulls a gun out of his pocket and switches to his other hand and then shoots Oleg. Then he puts the gun away. Then when giving a gun to Kurt, he pulls one out of his other pocket. Why not keep the gun near the hand you shot it with? And then 2. I would also like to note that the choreo only works if both Owen and Kurt aim with the same hand, either left or right. There's a few instances in the musical where a character will do this, where they have their thumb on the back of the slide. This is not good practice, as the slide will rack back into your thumb, cocking it backwards. I want to point out again, the deadliest man alive is sharpening his gun with a knife. I also want to make a distinction here that while Owen seems to prefer to shoot left-handed, deadliest man alive seems to prefer to shoot right-handed, which means either Owen is very good at his job, or the characters did not think of this at all. In Act 1, Part 3, you can see right here that Kurt is pretending to take the card away from Tatiana, but is in fact just palming it. In Act 1, Part 4, that phone is unplugged. In Act 1, Part 7, they're dancing a swastika. I just didn't notice that before. It's a swastika. In Act 2, Part 3, Barb makes the common mistake of calling a magazine a clip.
I got 2 guns, 3 extra clips.
Or at least I hope she does. We never see inside the bag. And if she brought 3 clips, that's not useful at all. But if she brought 3 magazines, that's potentially useful. Another distinction is that she doesn't say what kind of ammunition is contained in these clips, so it could not even be viable ammunition for the guns they have. And the last little bit to mention is the movie magic that happened to Kurt. I never noticed that before, but there's a distinct cut right there, where the audio continues as is expected, but then the video just cuts, and I didn't see that before. Okay, time for the big reveal. Let's see how many infractions the characters of Spies Are Forever have. Show me trigger discipline. That is Kurt. Kurt has a far and away the most amount of trigger discipline infractions. Okay. Alright. On to the next one. Show me muzzle infractions. That is a tie between Kurt and Tatiana. They both have the littlest regard for civilian safety. And finally, show me separation of ammo from firearm when firearm is not directly in use. And we only have 2 contenders on the board. It's Mrs. Mega and Tatiana. They're the only ones who ever did something that would be bad about it. So it's a tie between them for 1. Everyone else, it just didn't really apply to the situation. As for the rest of the summary, there's not too much interesting that's happening here. We have a bunch of characters that did a bunch of little things. The main characters all have their numbers up there. Kurt has the most trigger infractions because he's actually the only character I think who knows proper trigger discipline. It's just because he knows that, he makes the mistake of going on and off sometimes, and I have to count him for both times. Other than that, Deadliest Man Alive, in fact, has 0 muzzle infractions, which is interesting, because he is the one who is the deadliest man alive, killing 1,147 people. Ah, shit. It goes up in the film, doesn't it? 1,148, 9, 10, 11, 1,151 kills, I believe. Unless I'm forgetting something. Oh well. We'll just skip past that part. And secondly, I want to point out that no character has less than 2 violations. Every character that ever touched a gun has 2 violations. Alright, concluding thoughts of the video. I'm honestly not too surprised with how it turned out. Kurt Megged was always going to have the most trigger infractions just because he's the only one who pretty much knew trigger discipline. So it was going to be an issue where he would do it and then not do it, and I'd have to count him off for that. Muzzle infractions, I'm kind of surprised that it was a tie between Tatiana and Kurt Megged. I honestly thought that it would have been brighter spread out between the people. I would have thought that even Owen would have had a few more. Or actually, no, I thought people would have a lot less. I thought it would be a very responsible way to just not point your guns at other people. I thought it was kind of instinctual, but I guess not. I have very little else to say. There's some information in the description, a link to the document on my Google Docs. There's nothing else to do. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed gun safety in Spies Are Forever. Goodbye.